Okay, it is 10 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. We might wait another minute. We do have one person online. I'm hoping that we get some more, but this is just kind of how it goes. Sometimes you win some, you lose some. However, there are a lot of really cool things happening, and at the very least, we are recording it. So this will be, exciting for people to be able to watch back after the fact. So just to go ahead and be mindful of everybody's time. So the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning today is focusing on demystifying presenting and publishing. Per administration, I do want to give a warning at the top of the session. One, this is not something that you are required to do. We are not a research institution. We do not have tenure, so you do not have presenting or publishing requirements. That's part one. Part two is that should you end up using any materials that are on Mount West campus for any of your projects, and I'm sure you guys know this already, then Mount West is beholden to part of your money. So if you intend to do anything, make sure that you are being very mindful of the resources that you are using. For example, if you are a writer like me, if I know that I'm going to have a slow day, which is pretty rare these days, but if it's like a Friday and I know I'm going to be here while like no one else is here, I'll bring my personal laptop. I do not actually touch my work laptop for any of my writing purposes. So if you are wanting to do something that exists outside of Mount West, make sure that you are mindful of the resources that you are using. That is not to say that Mount West does not support you in your endeavors. It's just that's what the paperwork stipulates. So it is something to keep in mind. And it was something that Dr. Baker wanted me to mention before we got started. So in thinking about everything was working a second ago. Why is it? There we go. Okay. So in thinking about our session for today, our outcomes are the following. So we're going to be talking about research and researching and identifying proposal opportunities. So that's going to be our first outcome. Our second is composing proposals, abstracts, and titles that appeal to your target audience. You'll hear more today from the different folks that are in attendance, part of our group, that talk about their different experiences. Not every conference audience is going to be the same. Right? Especially too, if we're comparing something like a discipline-specific conference to a higher education conference. Those are going to be fundamentally different. And then compare academic and creative publishing processes. Both can be a nightmare, but for very different reasons. So we're going to be talking about the ups and downs that are part of those processes, and you'll know what that fundamental difference is. I do want to note that as we get into that section, when we talk about creative publishing, one thing that we're not going to talk about is creative nonfiction. That is a little different from some of the stuff that Chris and I will be talking about. I'll address that in brief, but that is not initially part of what we're slated to be going over today. And in terms of our more concrete agenda, we've got researching conferences, writing and submitting proposals, titles and abstracts, developing your presentation expectations and tips based upon those that have presented at conferences before, and then publishing academic work versus creative work, again, those fundamental differences and why we do it in the first place. So let's go ahead and start with presenting. Show of hands, how many people in this room or online, you can also raise your hand. How many of you have presented at a conference before? Everyone. Awesome. Okay, cool. So if there's something that's not mentioned up here on this slide, please feel free to chime in, especially because one of the reasons this was requested was there are, it's not an insignificant amount of people on this campus who haven't presented before. So if you've got expertise that you want to share, especially at the end, by all means, I have 2 microphones, would be happy to give that to you as we are working our way through. So we're going to go ahead and start by talking about researching conferences and where you do it. It's one thing to say, okay, I want to participate in an academic or creative conference. But then if you go to Google and you type in conference, it is overwhelming. So it can be a little difficult. So I'm going to focus again predominantly on academic conferences for right now. The first thing I want to plug is our CETL website. That is not a shameless plug, I promise. I do try to keep that as updated as possible per conferences that are often attended by faculty at Mount West. However, we're a very small institution. Other institutions, other CETLs that are significantly larger have bigger lists and have a lot of different offerings. One thing that I think any teacher will tell students at some points when they're learning new skills is that at certain times you kind of just have to steal, right? And we've only had our CETL for like 2 years, but you best believe I was in other people's websites. I was like, oh, you talked about this conference? Cool, I'm going to talk about this conference. So that can be a really great way to find this information. If we do not have it, one, email me, let me know, I will put it up there, but other centers for teaching and learning will. Education Dynamics is another really great place to learn about academic conferences. That's another one of the resources that I use, as is Chronicle of Higher Education. That's just one of the higher education publications that you can check out, but that one's pretty consistent, not just for job postings, but also for different conferences. And then finally, I want to highlight that your peers are a really good resource when it comes to learning about conferences. A couple years ago, I learned through Nathan and Zach that there is an entire conference just about composition. Just 101 and 102, technically. That is so super niche, but most students, if not all students, have to take it. Right. And I didn't know that existed until they told me about it. So being able to talk with your peers about hopefully a lot of things, but especially their expertise, that can really help you find where these conferences are. Again, as a plug for our CETL site, we do have right under the professional development heading a section that is just upcoming conferences. In that section, you will see the dates, the location. You'll see a quick blurb taken directly from the site, as well as a link to the site itself. So if you read something and you are like, yeah, I want to go to the AACC this year, cool. You can go check that out. All of the resources are there for you. And usually, and if you've been here for a while, you know this, there are times where there's just money lying around for professional development that does need to be used. I've talked to a couple different people on campus in this week alone who were told, hey, I want you to go to a conference, start looking into conferences. So I've been talking with them, like, where do you want to go? Let me help you do this thing. So if there is something that you want to do, don't just assume that, I'm here to teach. I don't really have to go to conferences. I'm interested, but I don't think there's anything out there for me. There is. I swear there is. And you've got plenty of stuff here on campus, people that would be happy to help you along with that. When it comes to the conferences, though, there are two different types. We're going to be talking about higher education, and I mean that as like broadly applicable. That means you're going to have sessions for administrators, you're going to have sessions for like folks that work in admissions, and then you'll have stuff for faculty. So those are pretty broad. That's where you get into things like the Higher Learning Commission Conference, which is happening technically next week, but it kind of starts on Saturday, bearing in mind the nightmares that are happening in the airports right now. So will we make it to HLC? I don't know, but it'll happen. Insights EDU, NISOD, which happens in Austin in May, ACE, AACC, etc. The ones that you guys were in attendance for your previous presentations were likely something like that, or something that is more discipline specific. That's where you get, for the writers, AWP. Chris and I were talking about, I want to send you there. I know you said you wanted to go. I want to send Chris to AWP. That is like the premier writing conference in the United States. We have joint mathematics meetings, etc. These are specific to your discipline. So before you decide, okay, I want to present, you really need to figure out what kind of conference are you wanting to present at and why, right? If I wanted to do something on assessment, it would be a lot better for me to go to a more broadly applicable higher education conference, something like HLC or Achieving the Dream, as opposed to something that is like AWP, right? Do I want to go to AWP? Yeah, every writer wants to go to AWP. But assessment's not the place to talk about that, right? So we would want to be a little bit more specific in terms of what it is we want to do as we select our conference. Here are some of the highlights of conferences you've likely just heard about this year. So again, HLC happening Saturday through Tuesday of this week and next week. Usually that is a good chunk of our administration, and then a couple faculty go. It is absolutely worth it. If you are ever asked to go, please go. It's super cool. I think it's going to be in Phoenix, Arizona next year, but previously, the last few years, it's been in Chicago. And I know what I know about assessment, in part because of our previous assessment leader, who was fantastic. But also when I got to HLC for the first time, she said, I want you to go to this, this, and this. And then I really learned how assessment worked. So highly, highly recommend going to HLC if you get the chance to do it. We have NISOD. NISOD is primarily about like professional development, making sure your organization is working the way that it is supposed to, you're communicating effectively, you're working with the teams in a way that makes sense. Or we end up with something like third party. That is where your institution is paying a third party to assist with planning. In the case of Achieving the Dream, that's one of many different things that a third party could be doing. AQ, for example, is entirely focused on teaching and learning excellence, whereas at Achieving the Dream, it's less about giving you practical examples for what's happening in a classroom and more focused on, okay, you want to do these big things on campus. how are you going to do it? Who are you speaking with? What does that organization look like, etc.? Which, if you're somebody like me, is a skosh frustrating, not because achieving the dream is doing a bad job, but because when I go to a conference, I very much want to be sat down in a room and told, you're going to do steps 1 through 10. Okay, cool. It's been 50 minutes. Get out of here. As soon as I go to a conference, if I step in a room and someone starts calling on people or making us do group work, I'm like, bye. Not doing it. Okay, I have submitted proposals before, but a lot of my proposals have been about like anime scholarship and writing syllabi about stuff like that. That's not really applicable to you guys. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Chris to talk a little bit more about submitting your proposal and what that looks like, because he's going to give you something a little bit more applicable than what I'm doing.
Ooh, tiny mic. Hi, everybody. All right. So CFPs, calls for proposals. At this phase of the process, you have identified a possible conference that you'd like to attend. You maybe have a topic in mind. And now you must look at the call for proposal, the CFP. And now I have a question for you. Are you down with CFP? Yeah, you better be, because if you're not reading that CFP carefully, you may be wasting your time and the time of whoever it is that reads your proposal submission. The CFP, in short, will explain what it is that the conference is looking for. I've found with different conferences, and I've attended some that are discipline specific. I've also attended some that are I don't know if discipline specific is the right way to put it, but West Virginia's financial aid professionals have their own annual conference. And when I had a cup of coffee as a financial aid professional, I was actually a speaker. And so, yeah, the key is review the CFP carefully. Know that if there is a theme, if there's something that aligns with what they want to hear. Also note in the call for proposal, if there are any sort of time or material limitations or things that they are expecting you to bring. Much like applying for a job, failing to pay attention to what the other party is looking for is a surefire way to fail. I don't know that I have much more to add to that. Really, it's just a matter of make sure you know what you are getting into, respect your time and the time of others by reading the document carefully, and doing something that makes sense. Hope that is sufficient. Talk to you all again in a little bit.
It absolutely is. And I would also say, too, when it comes to something like this, and I'll be talking about this same general idea when it comes to trying to get your creative work published. If you talk in your office sometimes about like, oh my gosh, I wish students would follow directions, you yourself then must follow directions. That is a crucial part of a lot of this, because Chris is right. You really don't want to waste somebody's time. And in the case of publishing, when we get there, you don't want to end up on somebody's shit list because you're not doing the right things. So definitely making sure that you are looking into what that conference is looking for. Now, when you are composing your title, bear in mind, I come from an English background. Our papers are a little different. Our general setup is something witty, followed by the thing that you are actually talking about. So this is just something I came up with on the fly. I promise I do not have this paper written. I'd read it. But yeah, it's a me, capitalism, exploitation of labor in Mario Sunshine. This is pretty common in academic spaces in which you are looking at something like literature, art, etc. That is not to say it does not happen at academic conferences. I was actually texting with a friend of mine who is at a conference for advising. She was in Lexington and is coming back today. And she texted me from a Ted Lasso panel. And I was like, and I haven't seen Ted Lasso, but I was like, hey, how's that work? And that was in the title. Like, it was a specifically like reference to Ted Lasso, semicolon, whatever it is they were actually doing. And they were playing clips from this show to kind of contextualize what it was that they were wanting to talk about in terms of advising, making students feel comfortable, being your authentic self, whatever. So this is not just a one-off for the English people. One thing to be clear about, though, when we're looking at something like this, it's still very obvious what that panel's gonna be about. And clarity is super important. It can be very easy to kind of lean into like, oh, I'm going to make this cute and exciting, but it can also be so cute and exciting that no one knows what you're talking about, which is why everything following that semicolon is super important. So when you are composing your title, probably start with this section first, right? What is it that you are talking about? You could lead with just that. You should also check the vibe of the conference. Am I going to pull this shit at HLC? No. At AWP, you bet I would. It depends on the vibe of the conference. So like Chris was saying, making sure we're following directions, looking for that call for proposals and things of that nature. When you are composing your title, you need to be clear about what it is you are actually talking about. The witty part can come after that. But when you are, and I'm sure you guys have seen this before, when you go to conferences, usually everything is listed in an app and you will see the titles of the sessions first. And if there is a title that is unnecessarily long, or obtuse or trying really, really hard, but does not tell me exactly what that thing is about, I am going to skip it. Whereas if I see something like this, I think, okay, yeah, cool, gets my attention, but it's also telling me exactly what it's going to be about. And that's what I care about the most whenever I am trying to decide what it is that I'm going to be spending my time on at a given conference. Now, let's say that you have looked at the call for proposals and you think, yeah, all right, I think I'm going to fit in to this conference. I want to go ahead and submit my abstract. I'm going to turn this over to Mary, who is going to tell you guys all about how to write a successful abstract, because there's a lot to keep in mind. Again, very similar to that theme we've been talking about before, following directions. And Mary is really good at this, among other things.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've had exactly one experience with presenting, and it was a year ago at the West Virginia Council of Teachers of Mathematics. So I did something similar to what you were talking about with the title. I had, something clever tied to the theme and then more information about what it was. And one of the things that I learned is that there are sometimes character limits when you write your abstract and submit it. So I had something written that was, a little more in depth, and then had to cut it down to 500 characters, still trying to get everything in there. So that was one of the first points that I wanted to point out, is that you want to be brief, but also thorough. Make sure that you're very clear about what your presentation is actually about. I've attended other sessions before when I misunderstood, or maybe the session was misrepresented and ended up being very disappointed because it wasn't applicable. Definitely just contain an overview of your content. And optional things that we included some information about our background. It was Kelly Hall and I presenting, and so we included information about the fact that we are college professors working with incoming freshmen and high school students with 30 years of experience in teaching, just to give some credibility to our session. And like I said, we did try to connect it to the conference theme, which was spring into math. So we talked about cultivating confidence and made it kind of cute, which was appropriate for our conference, as you said. So
I love that theme. That's so fun. It was. Themes aren't always super fun. Sometimes they are, though. It just kind of depends on whatever it is the conference is feeling. And these are some pictures that Mary added of her experience at this conference. Do you want to talk a little bit about?
I did want to mention a couple of things. I forgot that was the next slide. Sorry. So this is a picture of me and Kelly wearing our nerdy math shirts. It was Pi Day, so I was super excited. I was actually slightly disappointed that more people at the conference weren't like super stoked about Pi. I was a little surprised it wasn't a sea of Pi shirts, but that's okay. One of the things that I did in our presentation, and I'm not sure if this quite fits right after the abstract, but here it is. We put up a screen at the beginning of our presentation that was just up on the wall when people were coming in, and we had them create their math name, and I had little Pi Day name tags. And so the idea was, you go with the first letter of your last name and the month you were born, and you can become, for example, I would have been Archimedes the Logical, and that was my name tag. Just something kind of fun, which again was appropriate for that conference, but may not be for all of them. And then I have a picture of another slide that we put in our presentation just to highlight the fact that when you're actually creating the slides, which I know is not a big part of what we're talking about today, make sure it's clear and readable, have a nice cohesive theme. That's part of why I included that on there. And make sure the graphics that you're including, of course, are copyright free, obviously.
Yes.
Important to note.
That is a very, very good point. That is a rule I frequently break it in service. But yes, that's a very, very, very good point. Absolutely. Okay, we are going to transition to talking about Kelly's experience. She's going to be talking to you about discipline-specific research poster presentations, which I'm super excited about because I haven't attended a poster presentation session before. So take it away. And I have a clicker. Should you decide you want to use it?
Is the pointer working?
It works, but the light is very faint.
That's okay. Okay, well, I am here to present more about poster presentations. So with our specifically physical therapy discipline, you can do poster presentations one of two ways. You can present just a poster, and like at breaks, people come around and look and view at the posters that are being presented. Or you can do what we call platform presentations, where we then talk about our posters to a group of people. So it's like one of the sessions, so we can actually talk about our research in that type of poster platform presentation. And I've done both of those. So the actual getting ready for each of those is about the same. So when we submit our information to be reviewed, when they call for our proposals, those two, the platform presentation and the actual just poster presentations, we do that process the same. So some of this will be repeated information from what Morgan kind of already talked about. These are just some tips for discipline-specific research posters or presentations. You need to show clear clinical relevance and choose new and innovative topics. So for our discipline, they're always looking for what's new out there in the field of physical therapy. So that's a really good tip to make sure that your poster idea might be chosen. So I'm always looking for new treatment techniques that are out there to try and kind of look at that as a research topic. Have concise and structured writing, include measurable outcomes. So when they're looking at our abstracts, they're really honing in on what are we using to measure our outcomes. So they have to be, these outcomes must be kind of backed up by valid and reliable research showing that what we're using to measure has been used before, and that it's been shown to be very reliable and very valid. So those measurable outcomes, they really hone in on kind of reviewing what did we choose. And in clinical practice, especially the field of physical therapy, we use lots of different things to measure things, so different tools to measure specific things. So for example, if we're measuring range of motion versus strength, there are specific tools that are used to measure those. And if you, in your research, you don't use the tool that is basically the one that is shown to be most reliable, you might not be chosen again to present. So that's something that you really need to look at when you're developing your study. And lastly, it fits the interests of the chosen area of expertise. It is best to make the poster topic related to a specialty area. So when I present, I usually present at what we call our combined sections meeting. So this meeting is kind of divided up into the specific sections of physical therapy, like a pediatric section, an orthopedic section, a research section, an education section. So you need to make sure that what your topic is, it fits into one of those areas. So we don't really look at general topics, because general topics usually aren't chosen. So you really need to make sure that the topic is within one of those specialty areas. And what makes it nice for me is that there are sometimes that I have presented in a specialty area, because my specialty area of practice is geriatrics. So I will have presented on that topic, but because I'm an educator, I've presented a lot in the education section, because I'm a member of both of those sections, and I teach the orthopedic track in our program. So sometimes I have submitted things in the orthopedic section. So you really need to make sure that you're honing in your project to one of those particular areas. Relevance to the discipline area, scientific or clinical merit, appropriate design, valid methods, adequate sample of rationale, meaningful outcomes, and logical conclusions. So when I think any discipline, you know, that you need to look at when you are gathering, kind of figuring out what your research is going to be about. You need to always have in mind, what is the design going to be? What type of methodology are you using? Adequate sample of rationale, meaningful outcomes, and logical conclusions. Because in my discipline specifically, they look a lot at what samples we use. So was the sample size big enough? Was it diverse enough? Those type things. So that's usually the hardest part when I have started to figure out what am I going to do for my proposal, is to figure out what type of research can I do where I'm going to have an adequate sample that meets the needs of the study, and that also is going to meet the needs of the reviewers that are going to be looking at my presentation. Originality, innovation, novel intervention or approach. That's kind of the same thing I mentioned before, making sure that you're looking at what's new on the horizon in your field of discipline. Clarity and organization, results and outcomes. And in this discipline-specific research, again, the results and outcomes are going to be scrutinized probably the most. So make sure that you have quantitative results, specific outcome measures, pre and post comparison. And I put function at the end there so that you make sure that the results that you're providing function within the discipline so that it's usable data. That's, I think, most often what the reviewers of these proposals are looking at in disciplines, is the data that you're presenting usable and functional within the field. So what does a good poster abstract answer? What problem did you solve? How did you do it? What changed because of it? And why should people working in the specific profession care? I always, when I'm, finished with mine, I look at that and think, is anybody really going to care about this? Because if not, it's probably not going to be chosen. So you need to make sure that the discipline that you're working within, those people really care about what you're going to be talking about. And I just wanted to give a brief overview of my most recent poster presentation. So I wanted, right on the left-hand side, say, consider presenting on a topic related to education. Many faculty teaching within technical programs were never taught to be teachers, because I've been doing this for 20 plus years and I wasn't taught to be a teacher. So I continue to learn, and I've learned a lot through the research that I've done that's been educationally based. So when I got the opportunity, when Marshall's DPT faculty approached me and said, hey, do you want to do this with us? I was like, this is a great opportunity to do something that's really educational research and not really physical therapy practice research, which is what I'd been doing forever up to that point. So the most recent one I did was feasibility and effectiveness of intra-professional education for physical therapists students and physical therapist assistant students. So what we were doing was collaborating together to figure out what type of educational activity could get these groups of students together, because the thought was these students are going to be working together as professionals. So somehow I've lost.
You see the back button.
What did I do? Oh, the back. Okay. I'm like, where did it go? Okay. So we thought, these students are going to eventually be working together, and we never bring them together. So we thought, if we bring them together before they get out in the working world doing an activity, then that's going to help them to understand how they work together once they're actually working in the field. And what was nice was our accrediting body was getting ready to make it a standard that this had to be done. So we thought, well, Marshall's faculty thought, let's be innovative and do a study that shows what type of activity is going to be best at helping them learn to work together before they're working together in the field. So that's what our presentation was, our poster was on. So what did we conclude? We got a lot of feedback from PT and PTA students, was positive and promising. The small group case-based intraprofessional education session was shown to be a feasible and effective model that can be included in PT and PTA program curriculum. It allows both PT and PTA students to initiate early communication and interaction that may promote future optimal physical therapy service delivery. So this actual presentation turned into something that we're now able to work together as two different academic institutions. So since that time, this idea for the poster presentation has resulted in a collaborative event becoming an annual occurrence, and other institutions have used this model to develop their own events. So we were really proud of that. So I thought that that was something, just a tip that I could give whoever's watching this. If you can think about how can I make research maybe turn into something eventually that I can bring to the classroom and even share with other colleagues and people in the academic arena. Students can also be involved in the research. So our students were involved in this. They were our samples. So that was just great. They were our samples and we had enough of them. So we had enough of a sample size for that. And then I talked to Megan about including, this kind of doesn't fit, but I thought that it might fit here. We do within our program student research poster presentations, and I think this is really important. I think across the college we can get our students, even though it's not a requirement for them to actually do research projects, but if they can do a lot of research reviews beyond just doing papers, because I think if they start out in the general education curriculum doing research papers, it prepares them to do something like this once they're in their program. So, and it's working well because our students in the program are very prepared because the general education faculty prepare them well doing lots of research early on. And then we have them do this poster where they do a research review of a certain neurological topic, and then they present their review in a poster format. So it's not, it kind of matches what we do in research, but they're not actually researching, they're presenting their review. And they do this in a setting. We bring in clinicians and they come and look at their posters and they answer questions. So it's like they're at a conference, but they're just here in GO7 doing it. So I've enjoyed that. And so hopefully that maybe that'll give some of you all listening an idea of how to include research in some of your assignments, that it looks more like what we're doing on the faculty side of research. And then just some expectations and tip. This is not me. So we're moving on to somebody else. Susan.
Thank you. All right. These expectations and tips are pretty general. I do, Mary added some as well. So she's going to come back up here and talk about these in a second. So let's say that everything has gone the way that you wanted it to. You identified a conference. The conference really fits what you want to do. You look at the call for proposals and you think, yes, all right, this fits me perfectly. You get accepted. It is the day you are presenting. Couple things to keep in mind. First of which is set attendance expectations. I was going to sessions after lunch because that's what you do at conferences. But if you've been to multiple conferences, you'll know that after lunch, suddenly the attendance drops. And it's like, where'd you people go? And I was at one of those later sessions, and even the folks speaking were like, listen, I know it's after lunch, everyone's tired, and half of you are thinking about, are you going to make it to the Nike store before we finish? So keep in mind, let's say that you are slated to have a session later in the afternoon, you may have lower attendance. That is not your fault. You have not done anything wrong. That's just kind of how things tend to go at conferences. Conversely, let's say that you are 10 in the morning, I would say, is probably like the best time slot to get a whole lot of people at a conference. If it's massive, if it spans multiple buildings, again, your mileage may vary, but set reasonable expectations for attendance. I wouldn't hype yourself up or make yourself anxious and think, oh my God, every seat's going to have a butt in it. It might not. Right? So be reasonable when it comes to the expectations that you are setting, and think about how you are going to, if you are going to be handing out materials, if you're going to have a QR code up on the screen, be prepared, have multiple contingency plans. If you've got a room full of people, everyone's talking, everyone's asking questions, and you know you've got some stuff coming up that you're going to have to engage the audience with, scale that back if you need to. If you only have 3 or 4 people in your session, consider having a little bit more one-on-one time, having them like actually have conversations with you, but set realistic expectations for that. Number 2, make sure to get there early. If you know you'll know what room you're going to be in, attend the session that's in that room before you're slated to be in there. That's typically what I do. If I notice that they are having tech issues, I will go and find the tech person because I know I'm next and I don't want to be stuck with that, right? It's also very likely that, let's say that the sessions are in hour time slots, that person is probably going to talk for about 50 minutes. That's what I do. If I'm given an hour, I talk for 50 minutes. That way I can get out and somebody else can get in and set up. That way it can keep running the way that it is supposed to. If you are already in the room, it makes it easier for everybody. So get there early if you can. And then make sure that you are considering your own pedagogical approaches. Again, I mentioned earlier, people calling on people during conference sessions. That runs completely, it's the antithesis of what I do. I don't do that. But if it works for you, if it works for you with your students, consider doing it with the folks that are going to be in attendance. If you know, based on your research, based on your teaching experiences, that talking at people for 50 minutes, which is my favorite thing at a conference, please talk at me for 50 minutes so I can take notes and then leave. But we know that doesn't work for students. We know how their attention span works. We know how ours work. So keep that in mind. Ask yourself some questions like, are you going to call on people? Are you going to have attendees participate in group work? Please don't. But is that something that you feel will be beneficial? Consider what works for your classes and how you can scale that for this specific session. All right. And then Mary has some other things that she would like to add.
So the first one goes along with what Morgan just said. Be respectful of everyone's time. We all know sessions that sometimes go over and you're panicked trying to get out of there, but being respectful of them without leaving early, make sure you're staying focused and on topic. I know that we as educators sometimes get a little chatty. We get excited about our topics and want to continue talking. Just be aware that you stick to your slides and save those conversations for outside of it. One of the things that we did when we presented is we prepared a OneDrive and a QR code, and then we handed it out on a flyer with our contact information, but some resources that we wanted to share with our colleagues. So we encourage them to connect with us afterwards, continue the conversation by, at the very least, putting your email address or contact information on the slide. But a QR code is another really good way to share that information as well, or bring business cards, which I had all of those, and then 3 people showed up to mine. So it was, one of those like, oh, I was really excited to share this. And I think it was just that the conference was geared more towards K-12, not college. So, but that's okay. And then the last one I have on there, of course, is make it fun if appropriate. And that's the Pi Day stickers and name tags that I had. Sometimes presenters will even hand out candy if they get people to answer, just something to be engaging and exciting. If that's appropriate. Obviously, in a serious academic discipline specific one, you may not want to do that. But these were just some of the things that I saw based on sessions that I've attended. And we all have those same thoughts of, man, I really wish that they didn't do it this way, so I'm going to do it better the next time. So those are the kinds of things, like, you can take your own experiences and bring them in.
Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to go ahead and switch gears, and we're going to talk about publishing. And again, we're going to talk about both creative publishing and academic publishing. We're going to start with talking about literary journals, and Chris is going to walk us through that. I love the headings that you provided.
Oh, thank you. Still can't get used to the tiny mic. I feel like a Gen Z YouTuber, which not included in the slide here, but always good to think about your emergency exit plan, just in case things don't quite work out in academia. So not that long ago, I went to the coffee shop that is my regular, like they know me, they know my name, they may know my social at this point. And it's one of those places where they put your name on the cup. And I came in, I grabbed my cup, and on the cup, the name read Chris Pratt, like the actor. And I wondered initially, are they trying to tell me, like, yeah, a little bit of you goes a long way, buddy. Maybe you should have left at Parks and Rec and never been seen again. But no, I read it out loud, and the employee who wrote it kind of like became solemn all of a sudden and stared into the middle distance, like at the floor, and said, I don't know why I did that. And this is just to say there are times in my life, and perhaps you can relate to this too, where I also kind of stare off in the middle distance, reflecting on experiences and saying, I don't know why I did that. But with with the high mountain of things that I reflect on and ask that or say that, creative writing and sharing what I write with people has never been one of those things where I've doubted. That's where I'm locked in. That's where I am most myself. That's where I feel most alive. And on days where nothing else really seems to get me up and get me going and justify the blood that pumps in my heart, this is it. So it's a real treat to get to talk to you a little bit about the process. So starting with this slide, we presume that you are a writer or you are interested in sharing what you write with an audience beyond friends and family, which nothing wrong with that. That is beautiful. If you have people that are supportive and interested in what you do in your circle, cherish them. Not just because of that, but because they love you and you love them, right? But assuming that you want to share it with strangers who are interested in the kinds of things that you write. In this case, for me, it's poetry, fiction, and although we won't talk about creative nonfiction, I have a little bit of that out in the world too. But okay, so general advice before you start sending stuff out, and then we'll get into looking for places to send it to, trying to find ways to make it interesting for readers by, giving them titles that make them go, yeah, I got to read that. What is that? And something that is kind of bizarre and a little discouraging when you meet people interested in writing is to find out that they don't like to read. And I think I saw recently on the interwebs, and perhaps you did too, that we now have film students who don't watch movies. Can somebody help me? What's going on in the world? Is everything just like opposite day for everybody in every sector of, sorry, I have the opposite of Mike's problem. I talk too closely into the mic. But in any case, so yeah, straight up, if you want to write, you have got to read. You have to care about, it's like trying to write music and not really wanting to listen to it, which that probably is a thing too, honestly. But yeah, so, and before you start sending things out to lit journals, so regularly published things that focus on creative writing literature, read those. It's beneficial for you as a person. Ostensibly, you write because you care about what this kind of art can do for people. So you would want to plug in and be connected with that, right? But there's also that professional enrichment. If you are approaching things from the discipline that like Morgan and I have been and may continue to do. But in terms of trying to actually publish the things that you're writing, reading widely, reading journals lets you know this is what this journal's interested in. And you want to make sure that it's the right fit for the stuff that you write. Otherwise, we go back to the CFP presentation problem of you don't know what we're looking for. You're wasting our time and yours. Best of luck to you. All right. Of course, you must write. When you are writing for an audience at this level, it is a no rush situation because real people are going to read it. So don't feed them slop. We have plenty of slop. You can get it for free as long as you have a device, so don't worry about it. Your slop isn't needed. Also, sometimes journals will pay you money. People have given me money for what I've written. I'll repeat that. People have given me money for what I have written. Not a lot, so that's not my plan B, but that's not like my primary concern when I write stuff ordinarily. And if you're a poet, don't expect people to pay you a lot. But the point is, if somebody's willing to pay you for a thing, give a damn. Just a little bit. So take your time writing, share your work with those trusted readers before you send it out for an editor or for a group of people to vote on, debate, and decide whether they want to publish it. And also, if people say yes to your work, expect that they may also ask for edits or revisions, so that also will take time. Again, no rush. And also, know what to expect. This is like something that needs to be its own discussion, but in short, know that there are different kinds of publication rights and that you are entering a legal agreement with an entity that says, yes, we will publish. And that may mean that you're giving up your rights to reprint the thing that you have written that they're publishing, or you may be able to publish it later on down the road, but you will have to give them credit and acknowledgement saying that they originally published it. They may also, if they're online, have a requirement of perpetual publication. I forget the exact wording there, but it's the idea that they can keep it online as long as their site exists. Okay, so just know what you're getting into. And also, rejections do happen. It's just like if you ask somebody out on a date, it hurts when they say no, but you got to take your shot. And the same is true for creative writing publishing as well. All right, where do you find lit journals? As concisely as possible. Bookstores around here. Books A Million over in Barbersville at the bizarrely named Huntington Mall. I'm not a local, I don't get it. But sometimes I feel like I'm not from this planet because I don't get it either. But over in Charleston Taylor Books, they have lit journals up in the periodicals section. Poetry Magazine, which is the premier US publication for hand guides and field books. No, for poetry, like the name would suggest. Also based out of Chicago, the greatest city on earth. The Paris Review is another big one. And there are others, but I definitely wanted to name drop those two. Although we were cautioned about jumping into looking for conferences by Googling them, this is also true of looking for lit journals. But if you are just getting started, Googling lit journals might be worth your time, but again, can be overwhelming. So let me go ahead and shout out two online resources that are worth your time: Poets and Writers and New Pages. When I was coming up through grad school in the early 2000s, New Pages was the one that we were all told, go check that out, see what their call for submissions, CFS, see what their call for submissions are. If you happen to be one of the poor souls like myself who was locked into social media, after a while, your algorithm will pick up on what you are looking at. And that is how I've discovered more than a few lit journals. Also, if you want my Instagram later, talk to me. I could really use the follows. I'm trying to sell a book. All right. And finally, colleges and universities. There are colleges and universities that publish annual lit journals. Some of them are fairly local. Marshall University, do they still do etc., as far as you know? So yes, and it's student run. Yes. Yes. We'll probably hear more about that later, and I'm excited to. Of course, we don't have that here, but we're not really built to do that sort of thing. So really, I would look at universities. Other big ones, just to name off the top of my head, would be something like the Iowa Review, based out of the University of Iowa, which is actually a powerhouse in the history of American letters. All right. How to title your literary works. So this is, again, about, you want a reader who wants to spend time looking at a thing you've written. It's really difficult to pin down what exactly it is about a title that makes a reader go, yes, more of this. Or what the hell, gotta read that. I've got a couple of examples that are interesting to me. I'll do this semi-quickly since there's so much ground to cover. I'm a big fan of the recently late poet Charles Simic. One of my favorite poems of his is called Eyes Fastened with Pins. Very strong image right off the bat. It actually also reflects his tone. His poems tend to be very, very dark, but also comical. A different poet who was operating about the same time as Charles Simic is James Wright, who's actually based out, or was based out of Southern Ohio, so kind of a regional poet. His third collection of poems was a dynamic change from what he was writing. It was pretty influential in American letters in the 1960s. All that to say, the opening poem in that collection is titled, As I Step Over a Puddle at the End of Winter, I Think of an Ancient Chinese Governor. And he has much longer titles. It's almost kind of a joke that in some cases in this collection, the title is longer than the poem itself. It might be very compact. So I like very playful writers, I guess is one thing you can take away. But what I like about Wright's approach to titling things is, you know how in poetry it can feel sometimes like you're being asked to figure out a riddle? Like it's like there's almost a guessing game, and that turns a lot of people off from reading it in the first place. What I like about Wright, this sly tactic of, I'm just going to give you the entire context for the poem in the title. You don't have to think about who's where doing what. This is it exactly. And then once you're locked into the grounding stuff, I'll just hit you with the crazy stuff, like who is the Chinese governor? What am I thinking, feeling? How does language interestingly convey that? So cool stuff can happen like that. And then if we're thinking about novels, which that's been on my mind a lot lately, one of my heroes in the world of novel writing is Kurt Vonnegut. And the novel Slaughterhouse-Five, beautiful novel, strange novel, and yet very accessible. If you've not read it, it's about the life of an American World War II vet who becomes unstuck in time. So the novel is not chronological. It keeps up with the way in which the protagonist, Billy Pilgrim, experiences time and reality, and at one point being abducted by aliens and understanding how the aliens experience time and reality. But the title, focusing on that, with all this wackiness going on in the novel, the title Slaughterhouse-Five is Vonnegut's way of saying, hey, this is a great Vonnegut impression, by the way. Hey, when you get to the part about the slaughterhouse, pay attention. It didn't sound like that. Plus, there's just something about slaughterhouse as a title, right? Slaughterhouse. It gets my attention. All right. It's time for me to show off just a little bit. A lot of my stuff lives on the internet. And yes, I have had students say, I've read your stuff. I've had people that were on my hiring committees, not for academic jobs, who've said, hey, I've seen your stuff. And that's a horrible feeling because you kind of want to, if you're me, you want to operate in a reality where you can both be this for people and also the mad scientist creating things, you know, because it feels almost like a split life kind of thing, which is kind of beautiful, but then you're giving it to an audience. It's really not. But I've got a selection of things over the years. These are some of my things that are in physical print. So Morehead State University, where I did my master's degree and where I worked for a little bit a couple of years ago, they have an art and literary journal published every year run by students called Inscape. So back in 2013, I actually had a couple of stories and poems that were published in there. The center image is the cover of my international award-winning book, Paradise Hammer. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That makes me feel good. It validates all the hard work. And also my mother thinks I'm handsome. So Paradise Hammer won the 2018 James Tate Poetry Award. James Tate's another one of my poetry heroes. Could have easily put in a dozen of his poem titles in one of the earlier slides. But anyway, that's actually kind of a way that I backdoored into the contest using Google to look for poetry. Because I was just in the mood to read stuff by people I really like. And that led me to the press that ended up publishing this book based out of Dublin, Ireland, called Sir Vision Books. And their whole deal is contemporary surreal poetry in the English language. And they have an international reading audience. So it's crazy to think that in 2018, I gave them a collection of poems and they're like, for now, you are the best in the world. We will publish this. And I did. I felt like CM Punk, and I took my ball and went home when things got hard too. Speaking of punk, my most recent physical publication is from a few years back. It was from an anthology by a small indie press. The title of the book is Punk, an Anthology of Poetry. And my contribution was a poem called Memoir of a Punk in Late Stage Capitalism. Clearly a work of fiction, but so yeah, cool things to see your writing like this. All right, it looks like academic publishing is up next. So passing the mic to Megan.
Thank you. All right, so my experience is the opposite of creative. It is publishing scientific research, which is very like cut and dry. This is this, that, and that. So academic publishing from that perspective can include conference proceedings, abstracts that you submit and then present at a conference. Those are going to be published essentially. And so that counts as academic publishing. Never been paid for that. No money. Maybe money in textbooks. So if you could write a textbook or contribute to a textbook, possibly you could get some cash that way. And then the way I'm most familiar with is publishing in peer-reviewed journals. Again, no money there. This is just for fun and notoriety, I guess. So if you're thinking about publishing in a peer-reviewed journal, you can publish research that you do, or you can publish just like things that you do in your classroom. It doesn't even necessarily have to be research. There are education journals, there are discipline-specific journals. If you're leaning, whatever, if you're publishing research at this college, you're probably going to be leaning more toward the education side of things rather than like scientific research. Full-length articles, of course, can be published, but that can sometimes be intimidating. So if you just have like, a strategy in your classroom that you want to share, or like a smaller scale research project, there are shorter things out there, like options. It doesn't have to be a full-fledged, 12-page research project. So finding journals that are appropriate, but also finding those journals that might have like those smaller kind of sections that you could contribute to. Basic roadmap for publishing. You do need an idea to publish about, mostly. So like maybe you have something that you try in your classroom that's unique or fun or really engages students. Maybe you're trying a new active learning strategy in your classroom. You want to share that. You could also notice that maybe there's just like a gap in the literature. I really love review articles because they take like all of the research on a subject and put it in one place where I can find it. And sometimes there's not a review article. And so that could be a place for you to compose something. After you have an idea, you need to do a thorough literature review and find out what's out there. When you do your literature review, you really want to think of your idea and how that fits into the existing body of literature. So has somebody done something similar? Are there conflicting results out there where like this works well in this setting, but not this setting? Like how is your idea really going to fit into what exists? After that, you identify a target journal. There are like scam journals. So make sure you find a legitimate journal. There are databases that list those, and I'm sure Jamie would be happy to help you if you need help with that. When you identify your target journal, again, you just want to make sure that your idea fits into the scope of that journal. So you don't want to take like an active learning strategy and try to submit that to some scientific journal. Make sure that it fits. Finding your journal too, you'll have like specific requirements for how your manuscript should be formatted, what sections it should have, what the bibliography should look like, so how your citations are going to look. So you should pay attention to that. I would normally identify like, here's the journal I want to publish into, but then have a short list because you may not get into that one. Rejection happens. And so then at least have an idea out there of what you want to do. Then you write your manuscript. So that can take a long time. You're not in a rush, as Chris said, like our job doesn't depend on our ability to publish, so we can take our time with these things. After you have your manuscript drafted, I like to ask somebody to read it because sometimes when I am like deep in the details, I don't see that I missed this, or I don't see that the flow is weird here. And somebody else that's coming that's never read it before will point that out to you. Then you'll submit. When you submit, you will submit online, usually get like a confirmation that they received your article. The editor will look at it, they will decide, is this appropriate or is it not? If it's not, you will get rejected. If it is appropriate, they will select a few people to review your article anonymously and give feedback. I have had at this stage an editor say, no, this is not what we're looking for right now, but they were really nice. And they were like, here are some journals that are looking for that kind of thing. So submit to them and you'll probably be more likely to get published. After your article is reviewed, you will receive comments from the reviewers and you need to address everyone. They will say like, maybe you need to change this, you need to change that. You don't have to make all the changes, but you at least need to say, I changed this. Here's where you can see the evidence of that. I didn't change this because blah, blah, blah. You need to say why. And then usually after that, you do your revision, you resubmit. Usually it's good. Once I make it there, I've never then been rejected. So like once you go through the process of making the revisions and resubmit, usually then it becomes published. And it may take a while, like this process can take months. So you're not gonna be published in a week, it takes a while. And then you will get a high from that and you will wanna do it all over again because you're gonna feel good about what you've done.
So that's a basic roadmap. I did just want to give a special consideration that if you're going to publish anything that has to do with student data, you have to get permission first. So you should develop a research plan, submit it. We're going to submit it to our deans. They're going to be our institutional authority. Normally you'd go through an IRB. You're going to submit that plan to the dean. They will read it. They will either say, this looks good, you can do it, or they might suggest some revisions. What the deans will be doing is they're going to make sure your research is ethical. They're going to make sure it's legal. They're going to make sure your students cannot potentially see harm from the research you're doing in the classroom. We do want to make sure that our students' identities cannot be discovered as we think about publishing that research. So if we are going to publish classroom research that's going to use student data, de-identified, anonymized student data, we do still have to have permission before we do that. And when you submit your manuscript, you'll probably have to submit a letter that says you had that approval. So when you do it this way, you're going to publish classroom research. It does take a bit longer. You need a fully fleshed plan before you go through the research. You have your idea, make sure you have some targeted research questions. Like, I'm going to try this active learning strategy. What is the change that I want to see in the classroom as a result of implementing that change? You'll do your lit review the same, but then you're going to have to draft a proposal. And the proposal will have you very detailed, like, here's the data that I'm going to collect, and here's how I'm going to code that data, whatever, and then what your plans are for, all those tests. Once you get that approval, it is good for 2 years. So if you want to do it over multiple semesters, you can do that. And then once you get that approval, then you can just go back to doing your research, drafting your manuscript, submitting to a journal. And we are out of time. For me, honestly, the biggest thing is I am not a person who does stuff by myself. I like to do stuff by myself, but doing this kind of stuff, I need collaborators to hold me accountable to do it. So collaborating with biology faculty at Mount West. And then I have collaborated with individuals at Marshall. I've met people at conferences and gotten into groups that help hold me accountable to do the research and have kind of taken me under their wing. And as a result of that, I have had a few publications come out, super scientific, but last year had a few publications out. And then I presented at a conference last summer of research in the classroom. And I'm in the process of writing that manuscript that I will then submit to a journal, hopefully this summer. So yeah, I would say if you're having trouble getting motivated, find some people to help you, and they'll hold you accountable.
Absolutely. Megan is right. We are right at time. So if you have someplace to be, I will 100% understand that. For the sake of the recording, I'm going to rush through this really quickly. The reason that I put publishing, I'm going to be talking about novels in particular, is because if you are looking at a research institution in terms of publishing, they want literary journals. Publishing, especially publishing in what I and Chris do, genre fiction. If you don't know, that's kind of like the redheaded stepchild of fiction. And when it comes to higher education, if you are not doing lit fic, then you are bad actually, and also stupid. So I actually just finished a novel by Dr. Jodie McAllister, who's from Australia. She writes romance, and in her acknowledgements actually talked about working with her dean and how hard it was to get a book that was selected for Book of the Month to be counted as her publication. So that's why this is at the end, because this is kind of like the last thing people think about. I've got some of my stuff up here. Like Chris mentioned, I did work for Etc. when I was a TA. So I was managing editor, I was fiction editor. I do have a braided essay up here that I'm very proud of. Periodically, I remember that it's out there in the ether and it's deeply personal, and I get a little horrified. But then to be more horrified, I remember that, kind of like, again, Chris mentioned, often in your writing, people will read it before they know you. My husband knew my writing before he knew me, which was scary. We were talking about something a couple years ago, and he was like, "Oh my God, you are the one who wrote that." And I was like, "Yeah, and if you could put that out of your mind, that would be great." I've been published in Water Soup, which I think it shuttered during the pandemic, which is a bummer. It was a really cool literary magazine. And then finally here in the bottom right, you see my stats from Query Tracker. I'm not trying to brag. I've worked really hard for those numbers. Query Tracker is where you communicate with agents. It's one way that you can communicate with agents. So my average positive reply rate is a little over a 12, and the average is a 4 for the regular members. So thank you. I worked very hard for that. So I'll be talking predominantly about that process and what it looks like to be querying. So there are a couple different places you can go to find out where you're going to be querying. Research is always super important. This is another case where if you are not paying attention, you are going straight to the dumpster. And it's not even going to be a you didn't pay attention. Sometimes it can be, but more than that, it's you're going straight to the dumpster. No one's going to talk to you. Not great. So when you're looking to find an agent for your work, and this is all assuming your work has been written at this point, you can go to Query Tracker. Again, that's the one that I use. I pay for the premium subscription, which means I get access to that comparative data. You do not have to pay for it. You maybe shouldn't. It's not fun sometimes to look at that data. It's not, for a lot of people, it's not as positive as my experience is. You can go to Publishers Marketplace. That is where you see current deals. If you notice that an agent is working in your genre, they've been selling a lot of books, awesome. If you find an agent on Query Tracker and they haven't sold a book in your genre in 5 years, maybe don't waste your time, right? That's probably not a thing that they're focusing on right now. The American Association of Literary Agents is a great way to just get a list. Manuscript wish list is a place where agents will go and post what they are looking for. You can even search through genre. So let's say that you are a horror writer. You can look for horror writers for agents that are looking to publish things for adults, and it will give you everybody who's listed there. It is super helpful. And then finally, go to your bookshelves. If you want to be a writer, go read the acknowledgments. Who are their agents? And then target their agents. The very first agent that I reached out to, fun fact about me, I sent my very first query back in May of last year. I got a positive response in under 24 hours. And that is because I went to my bookshelf and I found an agent who had published for an author that I like. And I was like, okay, I think you'll like me too. And she did. So definitely look at the acknowledgments and what you've got. When you are writing your query letter, this is going to be short. I'm talking 1 page, single spaced. You need to include the following. It is a lot to get all in there. The first thing you need is your metadata. That includes your title, your genre, your word count, and your comps. Your comps will demonstrate 2 things. The first of which is you know what you're talking about. You know what would be on the shelf with you if your work were to be published. And more importantly, the second element, you know what is actively being sold at the moment and what people are reading. So for those who do not know, I write contemporary romance. I love Susan Elizabeth Phillips. Susan Elizabeth Phillips is the reason we have contemporary sports romance as it exists. I don't like sports romance. I don't read her sports romance, but she contributed to that. And I do like a lot of her work that does not have to do with sports. I'm not referencing her in a Query Tracker letter. She was publishing mostly in the 90s. That's not happening. I worked with BFA students at Morehead State University, and they would be like, yeah, Kafka is a big comparison I would make to my work. I'm sure, dude. Hunger Artist is great. Kafka is so dead. Like, Kafka is still selling on like brand recognition at this point. Similarly, we don't want to shoot for the fences here. You do not want to compare your work to the Hunger Games. You do not want to compare your work to Colleen Hoover. I wouldn't want to do that anyway. But in the case of Suzanne Collins, right, you are entering this space. Demonstrate that you know the other titles that would be on the shelf next to you. They probably shouldn't be the ones that are selling millions and millions of copies. You need to be a little bit more realistic. Next, you're going to have your pitch, not to be confused with a synopsis. In querying, these are fundamentally different things. In your pitch, you sell your book with the highlights. You do not spoil anything. You might be asked for a synopsis by an agent. In that case, you spoil everything in about 1.5 pages, which again, very, very hard to do because on average, a genre novel is going to be about like 332 pages-ish. So that's 80 to 100 words, 80 to 100,000 words rather. If you are overshooting that, again, right straight to the dumpster. And a lot of publishing trends right now are saying that people want shorter books. So the 70K, 80K, those are starting to sell a little bit more. I will refrain from providing any thoughts on that. And then finally, you're going to conclude with your bio. Who are you? You will include your education or publishing experience if that is relevant and like a sentence about yourself. That is it. And again, this does need to be quick, just like I am trying to be. And let's say that, hypothetically, you send out your query letter, right? If an agent reads your query letter and says, yes, I am interested in working with you. This is where Chris and I are right now in our journey. My work is currently with 4 different agents. If one of those agents gets back to me and is like, yeah, I want to represent you, That's when you go out on submission. Submission is apparently so much worse than being in the query trenches. I've seen so many new authors talk about how they had to be like put on medication or needed like extra therapy assistance because of this experience. But that is where you start trying to sell your work to editors. So you go to agents first, then you go to editors. If you are wondering if you can go around an agent, yes, you are much more likely to lose money and the rights to your stuff. So we get an agent, we go out on submission, and then if an editor is interested, you might get a deal. The idea that an author is going to get a deal and then make millions of dollars, or let's say that hypothetically, sometimes you hear a lot about authors getting like 6-figure deals. It's not 6 figures by the time it hits the author. Not even a little bit. Part of that goes to the publisher, or not the publisher, part of that goes to the agent. Part of that goes to the different fees that are associated with it. By the time it gets to the author, you might be looking at like 50, 60. There are plenty of best-selling authors who don't live below the poverty line, but live like basic middle-class lives, because even though they're making, ostensibly lots and lots of money on these books, that money has to go to a lot of different places. Not everybody is getting a deal like and if you don't know anything about this is totally fine, but there was a book deal that was announced last week for $1 million. So not everybody is going to be making the ATYD money, and maybe it shouldn't, but if you don't know anything about that, that's fine. I'll spare you. It's a weird, publishing's a weird space right now. So if we're thinking about finally, why publish, why present, I think a lot of the speakers have already kind of explained why we do this, right? Megan talked about the feeling of like being high when you get that moment of publishing. Chris and I largely feel the same way. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine you feel the same way. And then when those of you that are presenting, right? Like that feels really good. Going to speak in front of a collection of your peers, talk about your work in a space where people are listening to you. They care about what it is that you are doing. There is a purpose in what you are doing. You're not just, you're not just in academia because you want to talk at students for hours and hours a day. And hopefully you're not just talking at them. But there are other professional pursuits that you are interested in. And one thing that I always tell my students is, and this is kind of the benefit of being an English person, if you like a thing, you can write about a thing and you can make an English career out of that thing. But you can really do that in any different discipline. So if you are doing it, it's because you are interested in not just being in one space, doing this thing, and then going home doing the 5 to 9 or 9 to 5, whatever. It is because, you've got other interests, other pursuits, and those are worth exploring, I think. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it here. And I think most everyone here is on the CETL team. But it's good. We're going to have this recording. That's fine. I know some people expressed interest in being here and they could not be here. So I am going to leave this here up on the screen, but I'm also going to send out a follow-up email to those that attended who were not on the CETL team to evaluate the session, which I would thoroughly appreciate. And so would the rest of the team. So thank you guys so much for your time.